I love it when people tell you that you should get out of your comfort zone. But what they don't tell you is whether you should get out of it a little bit or a lot. Whether you should rip the Band-Aid off a little bit or just rip that sucker all the way off together. Either way, if you find yourself doing something that is very uncomfortable, you are probably going to learn a lot going through that time of being uncomfortable and being outside of your, quote, comfort zone, unquote. For me, I can tell you that one of the times that I agreed to represent a client in Texas, even though I was only practicing law in Florida, that was one of my earliest getting out of your own comfort zone. So let me set this up for you, so for those of you who are trying to figure that, kind of want to follow along with me here. So here I am. This is back in 2007. I was just starting my own law firm, and I need you to understand this. When I opened up my law firm, I was already outside of my comfort zone. I had never run my own business. Up to that point, I had worked for the state of Florida. I had served in the military. I had worked in private practice for another law firm at all times from age 21 up to 37 or 38 years old. I had always worked for someone else. So clearly, me running my own business every day was taking me out of my comfort zone. So while I was trying to build my practice up, I decided that I wanted to expand into a new area of practice. So here's how you have to remember this. I had been working for a law firm for like 6 years. And so when I came out of that law firm, it was an administrative law practice. I took exactly what I learned there and decided I was going to apply it to my own new law firm. But I wanted to expand it. I didn't just want to be a specific area of law. So I decided to do that area of law and then another area. And that other area was employment law. Now, I had been, like I said, I practiced administrative law for 6 years. But this area I really was interested in because before I became an attorney, I worked in the labor and employment arena as a safety and health specialist and as an industrial hygienist. I worked in government arena, so I felt comfortable doing that. So here I am, not only running my own law practice, which of course is outside of my comfort zone, and I'm deciding that I'm going to go into a new area of law with no mentors, with nobody to guide me, and just basically me, myself, and whatever books I could research. So here I am. I'm taking on a few clients here and there, no heavy lifting. And then out of nowhere, I had a podcast that was going on at the time, and I had interviewed this one particular person on my podcast. And afterwards, about a year or so later, she reached out because she knew I was an attorney when I was doing the podcast, and she wanted to know whether I would be interested in representing her in federal court in Texas. Texas, y'all. Now pause on this for a second. I am in Florida. And for those of you who don't know anything about attorneys, the law practice is very jurisdictionally based. When you take your bar exam, you typically take it for the state you're going to practice in. And every state is a little different. And so I'm licensed in the state of Florida, and I'd only handled a few employment law cases at this time. But here she is contacting me and saying, hey, can you do me a solid? I want you to handle this case for me out of Texas in federal court. And I'm like, okay, why me? Because she trusted me. We had interacted. We maintained communication with each other after the podcast. And she wanted to get someone who wasn't in her area. And she wanted to go outside of the state, which is why she reached to me. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with how the legal practice works, in most jurisdictions, you can file what is called a motion pro hac vice. Hac, H-A-C, vice, V-I-C-E. You don't have to know what it means because it's Latin, but effectively what it does is it's a motion asking the court for special permission as an out of jurisdiction attorney to practice law on one specific case in their jurisdiction. So what it did was, all I had to do was file the motion, and basically ask the court. Usually you have to get a sponsor or somebody there in the area and say, hey, listen, is this guy all right? Or is this lady all right? And for this case, just that case, you can represent them in that particular jurisdiction. So that was one hurdle I had to get out the way. Now, I was really honored that she reached out to me and asked me to help. But I ain't gonna front, I was terrified at the possibility of handling a case like this one. And you're probably saying, well, why? Well, first of all, she was going against a city. So that's a big employer. Second, I was still relatively new to practicing employment law. Remember, I only had a few cases at this particular point in time. And then third and finally, this was a jurisdiction I did not practice. Remember, I'm in Florida. She's in Texas. Well, a little bit different there, y'all. All right. So here I am in a situation where I have a potential client reaching out to me saying, can you represent me? And as honored as I was, as hungry as I was, because I had to feed myself, because this was an additional case, this was an opportunity to make money. I had reviewed the information and I thought I could handle it. I was still terrified, so I then did what most people do when you're scared. I found every reason to talk myself out of it. Now, I didn't tell her no. I just basically tried to find ways to talk myself out of it and talk her out of hiring me. So I tried to find every reason. I explained to her that it would be in her best interest to get somebody locally. I was freaking out about going into an area where I was not familiar. I was petrified because I was worried I would screw up her case. I was literally, y'all, a bag of water because I was just so outside of my comfort zone. And even though I wanted to take on a case like this, it terrified me. But you know what? This is why it's important that you have people in your life that you can bounce things like this off to. Because for me, at the end, it came down to two attorneys who helped convince me to take the case on. The first attorney is an attorney named Marlon. Marlon is an attorney who graduated law school with me from Florida State University College of Law. He was 1 year ahead of me. So when I came in as the first year, he was the second year. And then I maintained communications with him afterwards. But let me tell you a little bit about Marlon. Marlon is brilliant. He is currently, I think, a partner in a very large law firm. He's moved to a couple of different large law firms, but he started employer defense practice immediately out of law school at a large firm. And he's been a partner in large firms ever since. So he was my go-to guy for employment law. And so here he is, and I was explaining to him about the case. He was nice enough to listen. And he was literally kind enough to kind of walk me through what I needed to do in order to prepare to handle the case. I mean, here he is. He does this on a daily basis. And he's literally telling me, this is all you got to do. And of course, he's nonchalant about it. He's like, what is the problem? So then he helped me get a better grip in terms of what I needed to do. He listened to me as I gave my theory of the case. And as I was explaining to him, he communicated the strengths and weaknesses, which were consistent with what I had observed. And as he was listening, he reaffirmed to me that I knew exactly what I was doing. In his mind, he didn't understand why I was freaking out because literally we are talking through this case and it is very clear to him that I have a strong grasp of the case. So what is the problem? But I can tell you, talking to him made me feel very comfortable that I was competent to provide this client with the representation she needed. However, like with most things when you're uncomfortable, I was still in my head about wanting to take on a case where I was afraid that I would be exposed as a fraud. That's when you have the imposter syndrome that kicks in. I was still petrified that I would get mopped up by some experienced attorney and I would basically cause my client's case to blow up. So even though my classmate assured me that I was more than qualified to competently handle the case based on the evidence that I shared with him, I still did not truly believe that I had the ability to handle the case. Which brings me to the other attorney, Ingrid. Now, Ingrid graduated from another law school a few years before me, but she and I connected and we both were running our own law firms at the same time. We would regularly speak to each other and kind of give each other pep talks about various legal issues and bounce legal theories off of each other on a regular basis. Now, I had always viewed Ingrid as being a risk taker when it comes to legal cases, and she was not trying to hear me not taking a risk, considering I had taken a risk to open up my own law firm just like her. I can still remember her listening to me whine about why I shouldn't take on this case, and then her cutting me off halfway through to basically tell me, and I quote, "Suck it up, take the case, go to Texas, handle it, and I don't want to hear about this anymore," unquote. And let me be the first to tell you, I was laughing my butt off, because that final conversation with her was the conversation I needed to have to let me know that I can handle the case. But it still wasn't that simple. I can still remember getting on a plane and flying out to Texas. Now, for those of you, I hadn't been to Texas in a number of years. And so in this particular instance, I hadn't been to Texas in a number of years. And I will be the first to tell you that I hadn't been to Texas since I was, I'd driven through it a number of years and so forth. But this was the first time I was going out there in a professional capacity. So I'm like, I'm really geeked up. And, the case was a federal case, which meant I had to travel to the United States District Court, and I was going to the Southern District of Texas. Now, for those of you who don't know, attorneys, when we go to courthouse, they vary to, some of them are kind of grungy, some of them are kind of upscale. But the one thing I've always known, because I've dealt with federal courthouses fairly regularly, almost every federal courthouse is smokingly smokingly clean, just jamming. And this one was in Corpus Christi, Texas, and it sat on the water in the Gulf of Mexico. Breathtakingly beautiful. Oh my gosh, I cannot even believe it. Breathtaking. So here I am, and I'm coming here, and it looked like I'm walking to an ivory palace. Nervous as all get out, because I had to come. This is the beautiful part. Why was I in Texas for this one? Because we had a proceeding that we had to have, and I tried to get the judge to let me appear by telephone, and she was like, no. Her protocol was for the very first initial pre-hearing conference for any case, she required all attorneys to appear in person. Now, you could appear by telephone for any of the motions and so forth like that. She was fine with that. But for that first hearing, she wanted to lay eyes on the attorneys. So here I am. I stroll in. The moment I started walking in to the court, I felt like all eyes were on me, because the moment I walked in the court, I saw a bunch of attorneys. They were clustered together, talking to each other. And then I strolled in by myself. And I didn't know anybody. And I can tell you, my insecurity was the size of an elephant, and my heart was racing 120 miles an hour, y'all. Woo! And I remember sitting down by myself, looking at my notes, still freaking out, because I was attending what was called a preliminary hearing, where the court effectively just wanted to know what my position was, or my client's position, what I was trying to obtain, and where the other side, whether or not the other side and I had actually tried to work things out. And I can still remember the judge looking at the pleadings and noticing that I had a Florida address. Now, this was the first time I'd gone out of state to handle a case, and this wouldn't be the last time. And it's always funny, because whenever I would go out of state to different places, my address always catches people's attention, usually for one or two reasons. One, because the name is different, because it would say Kissimmee, Florida. So that would throw people like Kissimmee, because they would have a hard time pronouncing the name. It was in Kissimmee, and I was like, it's Kissimmee. And then the other thing is that most people will recognize Kissimmee being Disney World. So that always was a conversation piece. So sure enough, here I come. And the judge looks down and says, according to this, you're out of Kissimmee, Florida? And of course, I'm responding in the affirmative. Yes, Your Honor. So she then says, you traveled all the way from Florida to help represent this client? And I'm like, okay. So I don't know whether she's saying that because she's just amazed that I would come this far, or just the fact that she doesn't get too many Florida attorneys coming before her. Either way, that didn't do anything to make me more nervous. I'm like, oh man, did I really mess up here? So, okay, the judge sits there and she's like, all right. And then it was hilarious, because the judge asked me, okay, counselor, what are you looking for in this case? And I said, nothing. And you can see kind of this pause, because the other attorneys in the room looked at me, the opposing counsel looked at me, and the judge kind of looked at me with a squinted eye and said, wait a minute, you want to say it again? I said, nothing. So she stopped. She said, are you sure that's what you want to say? And I said, what do you mean? She said, you're going to tell me, counselor, that you flew all the way here to get nothing for your client? And that's when the light hit me. I'm like, oh, that's not necessarily what I meant, Your Honor. What I meant to say was, we're looking for monetary damages. I don't know what was going through my mind, but guess what? She smiled, the other attorney smirked, because they could tell I was nervous. But guess what? They didn't lose their mind. They were like, okay, just keep it moving. So then at that point, she tells me and the other attorney, go see if you can work this out. If you can work it out, great. If not, we'll set a case management calendar. So we'll lay out the case in terms of how long you have for discovery, any motion hearings, jury selection, and the whole nine. So after that hearing, I went to speak to the other attorney, and as I was talking to him, I realized that it would probably be in the best interest of the client to settle the case, and we were able to come to an agreement that my client was agreeable. Now, I need you to understand something. Everything I'm telling you is something I'm doing for the first time, with no guidance, no mentors, or anybody to tell me that I was doing anything right or wrong. I had talked to my friends, I had researched the heck out of this case, I went over there pretty much sight unseen on my own. But you have to understand that when I was able to get a settlement agreement for my client, I felt like I was the king of the hill. So before I left the courthouse, my client had given me the authority to enter into a settlement agreement. She was happy because she got the opportunity to send a message that she was okay looking for counsel outside of the state of Texas. And she was happy and impressed by the fact that I was willing to travel from Florida to Texas to take on the city, this particular city we were going against. In my mind, I kept thinking that I wish I could have gotten her more, and which of course would have gotten me more money that I was able to get. But this was my first settlement in an employee case. I mean, my very first one against I strike that. This was my first settlement case against a large employer. And that truly felt like a success story to me, because I was doing everything on my own, by myself, for the first time, and I was able to get an outcome that my client was happy with, and it forced me to go into all these different things that I had not done before, and I felt much better for it. Now, let me be the first to tell you, in case I haven't made this abundantly clear, when I was going back to Florida, when I was on that plane, I felt like the biggest, baddest attorney in the world. The amount of money we settled on may not have been a lot. I might have not have been able to dazzle anybody with my courtroom skills, but I was willing to take on a case that I've never done before on my own and get a positive outcome for my client. To me, despite the fact that I was sweating through my shirt, it was the best lessons I could have learned. One of the things that people do not tell you when they encourage you to get out of your comfort zone is that they never tell you how far outside of your comfort zone you should go. But what you will learn fairly early on, in those rare times when you do decide to step out on faith and do something completely different from what you've ever done, is you have to trust that every sensation, feeling, and experience will ultimately make you a profoundly better person if you're willing to sit back, listen to it, and learn from it. And I can tell you, I'm so glad I took that case, because that case made me a better attorney, and more importantly, an even better person.